Wonderful, thrilling Thursday evening. Hope you had a fantastic day. And remember, we're reading this series, Little Legends, stories about exceptional men in Black history. I was listening to a brother earlier today, and he is a former, you probably heard of him, Ernest, is it Clem? But he's a former Chicago Public School history teacher, and he left because he wanted a different platform, and he travels all over the country, and he's on Twitter, but he gives Black history facts because it's just so important. And anyway, check him out. He's a young brother, I think. I don't know, he look young to me, but he's spitting out some valuable information, even about how the University of Chicago was founded, and talking about, all of that and its connection to African Americans. All right, well, we talked about Benjamin Banneker. We talked about James Armistead Lafayette, and today, or tonight, we're going to talk about Frederick Douglass. Ah, my boy. I can't say my boy, but he is probably my favorite hero. And I know, like I said before, I remember someone was saying, well, you know what, he was a player, and he had this wife, but then he was playing on, I don't know. I wasn't there in the 1800s, but I know what he did for Black people, and I'm thankful, and I focus on that because I can't negate the rumors. Anyways, let's dig in. Here's a picture. Okay, we always have a challenge with this lighting. Hopefully, or should I? Am I going to be able to see? All right, hopefully. You see that shadow? Okay, born enslaved on a plantation in Maryland, Frederick was separated from his mother as an infant. He understood that he was seen and treated as property. When he was 8 years old, he was sent to work for Hugh Auld, whose wife taught, remember his wife's name was Sophia. His wife taught Frederick how to read. It was illegal for a Black person to read and write, a tactic used to keep the enslaved from advancing. When Hugh found out, he put a stop to their lessons, but Frederick had learned enough to be able to teach himself. Yes! One of the first books he owned was a collection of historical speeches. So as he learned to read, he was also learning how to give speeches and form an argument, something he would become famous for. As a devout Christian, Frederick didn't understand how slave owners could co-opt the gospel to reinforce ideas of slavery. He tried to escape many times and even tried to forge travel papers. Yep, he was working on a boat, or he was a worker on a ship, and one time he disguised himself, and another time he borrowed someone else's papers to travel. Let's see. Anyway, he was he was found out. Yep. He was labeled a troublemaker and tortured for it. In 1838, he finally made his escape north. Yes. While free, he fought to abolish slavery. In 1841, he spoke at an anti-slavery convention. People were riveted by his eloquence. Northerners didn't understand the experiences of the enslaved. So Frederick published his autobiography, Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, an American Slave. It became a bestseller. Some didn't believe he wrote it or experienced it, so he wrote a second one, this time naming his slave owners. It was a risky move, and he had to go to the United Kingdom to avoid recapture. There he gave speeches, and 2 of his supporters negotiated to purchase his freedom back in the United States. He published several anti-slavery newspapers, including the North Star. He took his words of abolition to President Lincoln, advocating for the rights of black Union soldiers in the Civil War. He also supported women's suffrage. Frederick's lifelong efforts led to the ratification of the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments to the Constitution. And he is remembered as one of the most important people in not only Black history, no, in world history. That's what I'm talking about. Thank you. Thank you very much. The next person is Bass Reeves, Deputy U.S. Marshal. Never heard of him. This is why it's so exciting to read these stories. Oh, I hope you can see him. I don't want him in the shadow. Bass was born enslaved in Arkansas. As a boy, he was made a personal servant to Colonel George Reeves, who allowed Bass to learn to use a shotgun. Bass was so skilled that he even excelled in turkey shooting competitions. When people saw how good he was, they barred him from competing. Bass understood that as an enslaved person, there was no winning for him. George took Bass with him to fight for the Confederacy in the Civil War. Bass was able to escape to Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. He hid until the end of the war, learning the languages and customs of the Seminole, Cherokee, and Creek peoples. It really was a Wild West, a lawless land for miles around. Since tribal courts had no jurisdiction over U.S. citizens, many criminals crossed into Indian Territory to hide out. Excuse me. It was the job of the U.S. Marshals to go in and capture the bad guys. Excuse me again. In 1875, when the head of the marshal needed to appoint his deputies, he thought of Bass, who knew the land, spoke the languages, and was an incredible shot. Bass was one of the first black deputy U.S. Marshals. It was a dangerous job. In Bass's time, more than 100 marshals were killed in the line of duty. He was never shot, but had a few close calls, including one when the bad guys got his hat. He brought in around 3,000 criminals. Excuse me. I'm almost finished with this cold. Woo! I stayed home today from work. Woo! I didn't want to spread the germs. Before long, people far and wide knew Bass's reputation, the tough as nails, sharpshooting, 6'2" black deputy. He could shoot with both hands, but Bass chose to shoot only when necessary. Instead, he liked to use disguises and tricks to outsmart the criminals to make an arrest. It wasn't just about bad guys for Bass. He loved the animals and went out his way to stand up against animal cruelty. It's speculated that Bass was the inspiration for the Lone Ranger, the fictional masked hero of the Old West. There's no way of knowing for sure, but we do know that Bass was a real-life good guy who fought for justice. And I hope we all fight for justice, equality, and do what we need. Where there's a need, we need to fulfill. If that's your calling. All right. This is very, very inspirational, and I hope we put movement to what we have heard, and we make a difference. We don't have to have a stage, a platform, a microphone. We don't have to be on Twitter or all that, TikTok. We don't have to do that, but just make the difference. Bloom where you're planted. All right, have a good evening.